Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations and episode 3 of my xTool F1 series. 50% of my videos are based on epoxy resin, so today I'm going to be showing you how I implement the xTool F1 with my everyday epoxy resin artwork. If that sounds interesting, stay tuned and enjoy the video. Okay, before we get on with the rest of the video, let's address the question that most of you have probably come here for. And the question is, can I laser engrave epoxy resin? And the short answer is yes, you can engrave it, but should you engrave it? Well, this was my first question too when I got my laser engraver, and I did a lot of research online, and the overwhelming answer seemed to be no. Epoxy resin does release a lot of harmful gases when you laser engrave it. However, when I spoke to my xTool representative about this, they said as long as you're using the air purifier, it's safe to engrave epoxy resin. So this was quite a contradiction in my mind. I wasn't sure what to think after seeing all the negative things about engraving epoxy. So I thought, what do I do now? I have the xTool air purifier and I also have the exhaust going out of the window. So I wasn't sure what to do at that point when I was told by xTool, it's fine, just do it. Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen now. I did do it just so that I could show you that epoxy resin can be engraved, but the safety side of it I'm going to leave up to you. I've told you xTool's opinion and I've told you the general opinion on the internet. So you need to make up your own mind about whether you want to laser engrave epoxy. So there's my disclaimer. Let's see what happened when I tried. So as you've already been watching, I'm engraving a resin coaster. The settings I used are the IR laser, power 90, speed 50, 1 pass and lines per centimetre are 100. You can play around with the settings to get a light result or a dark result. I wanted to go for dark and I think that looks really nice, and you could do all kinds of intricate patterns and text on there. So yeah, I do like the results. And I know you can't necessarily smell harmful gases, but anyway, I will tell you that I couldn't smell anything at all. I'll get more smell from cutting acrylic or engraving leather. So I'm going to leave the decision up to you. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the different uses for the xTool F1 in my everyday resin art. So one of the things I was most excited about was the fact that I would be able to make my own mould masters from acrylic, and so then I could have some nice shiny handmade moulds. And for my example, I'm going to make a honeycomb designed coaster. I'm using 3mm black cast acrylic. It must be cast acrylic. And I'm cutting it using these settings on the screen. So it's 100% power, speed 2, pass 2. I really love how the F1 slices through acrylic like butter. And yeah, this came out absolutely perfectly. So that's the front piece made. After making that, I made a solid back piece. And as you already realise, the idea was to make a mould of this, and that way I could make resin versions of it, and then I would be able to fill each of the little hexagonal cavities with a darker coloured epoxy resin for a beautiful honeycomb design. Once I had my two pieces, I glued them together with E6000 glue. And luckily this isn't a video on how to make a wonderful mould, because my mould went a little bit wrong, and you can probably guess why. As you can see there, I've put my mould housing too close to the corners of the coaster in two places, at the top and the bottom there. There's not enough space around the edge, and yes, it did go wrong, but never mind. This is about giving you the idea of what you can do, and if you take a little bit more care with your mould making, you won't have a problem. So here you can see that my mould didn't turn out wonderfully, but that's nothing to do with the mould master. It's all to do with me. So let's not worry about that too much. So next was to make my coaster so I could show you the end result. I brushed my mould with pigment powder, and this is a nice gold one, and normally I would use epoxy resin, but I was kind of rushing and I decided to use UV resin, which really isn't a very good idea because it does warp a little bit if you're pouring it too thickly. But like I say, I was just rushing so that I could just give you an example. So once the coaster was ready, I filled the cavities with some bronze pigmented epoxy resin, and I decided to leave one of the cavities empty just to add a little bit of interest. And here's my finished coaster, and I think that's really sweet. And so the next step for the coaster brings us on to the next way the xTool F1 is very useful to me. Here I'm back in the xTool creative space, and I've got my original hexagon which I used to cut the mould master. I wanted it to be a little bit smaller, so I did an offset of -1, and then once you've done that you can see that you can separate the two, and I got rid of the bigger one and I've just kept the smaller one, which is, like I said, that offset of -1. And I'm going to be using this to cut a base for my coaster using tooling leather to give it a touch of luxury. It needs to have a hole in the middle because I'm also adding a stainless steel logo. My stainless steel disc is 3 centimetres, so I just needed to change the size of that and make sure it was centred. I dragged over everything to highlight it all together, and then I went on to subtract from the option at the bottom panel. Now it's all one piece and ready for cutting. Let's have a look at the settings. So I'd previously already found my favourite settings for tooling leather and saved it, so that's why you can see it there on my settings list. And it's blue light, power 89, speed 10 and 4 passes, although afterwards I found out that 5 passes would have been better for this particular leather. So I sped the footage up as fast as my editing software will let me, and let's have a look to see how it turned out. So as I mentioned, on reflection, 5 passes would have been better. So yeah, I just needed to finish it off with a craft knife. It was nearly there, but not quite. There you see, it's almost through. So it just needed finishing off. It also needs cleaning with a damp cloth just to get rid of any scorching, which you will get. You'll get your black powder around the edge, and that just needs cleaning off. So I found some of the old footage where I originally made my logos on my stainless steel, but I got the alignment wrong. So some of them are a bit off, but never mind, there were a couple in there that were salvageable. Then all that was left to do was to stick the leather onto the base of my coaster. And once again, I'm using E6000 glue. And once the leather was on, I added a little bit more glue to the inside and added my stainless steel logo. And I think the finished result really does add a touch of luxury. So here we go, all finished. What do you think? Do you like it? I do. I think it looks really good. So that's one project done. Let me give you a fly through now of some of the other ways I like to use the xTool F1 for epoxy resin. So this one really is a fly through. I made a base for a mushroom solar lamp with the xTool F1. It was just a balsa wood base, 3mm, and yeah, I designed it on the creative space, put it all together, made my resin mushroom top, and while it was still bendy, draped it over my base which I made. And yeah, I know you can't really get the grasp of it in this. There is another video which, went into more detail. But like I said, this is just a fly through, so you can get the idea of the different kinds of ways that you can use the F1 with your resin art. And there we have it. I really loved this. And I think the frame underneath that resin top worked perfectly. So now let's move on to what I think will be the most useful way for resin artists to use the F1, and that is making resin frames. Here's the first thing I made with resin frames, and it's balsa wood, and it's a pattern from Creative Fabrica. And yeah, I just made the lantern outline and then filled it with resin, and hey presto, I had 2 lanterns. So that was the first attempt at making like a frame for resin, and then I made some earrings. And these are far from perfect, I have to say straight away, but they're good, aren't they? I used UV resin for these, and yeah, the smaller you go, the harder it becomes, but I think that's about the smallest I could go. They're quite large earrings. But for that design, because it was so intricate, I couldn't have gone any smaller than that, cutting the wood, because the little bits of wood would have just broken. So obviously it does have its limits. So that's all the projects I have to show you today, but I'm hoping that that's enough to show you just how useful the xTool F1 is for any resin artist. If you've enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to, and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.